Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Thousands of Palestinians return home to Gaza after 15 months of war. Chinese AI startup DeepSeek threatens to topple America's dominance in the world of tech. Deportation in exchange for hefty tariffs. Colombia accepts repatriated citizens to escape President Trump's 25% tax on goods. And 80 years since Auschwitz, world leaders and survivors mark the liberation of the Nazi death camp. To the US and Colombia have pulled back from the brink of a trade war after Bogota agreed to allow US military flights carrying deported migrants to land. US President Donald Trump had threatened to impose tariffs on Colombia after it initially refused to accept the flights. The White House is hailing Colombia's U-turn as a victory for President Trump's hardline approach to immigration. Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Migrants are still heading for the US border, despite Donald Trump's hardline immigration policies.
We should be given an opportunity to enter. We come here to work, not to do crime, nor to prank, but to work. I have a family going through a hard time because of the Venezuelan government.
It was the Colombian government in Trump's crosshairs on Sunday when President Gustavo Petro barred 2 military planes carrying Colombians deported from the US from landing. A social media spat erupted, with President Trump threatening to impose tariffs on Colombian exports to the US. But late on Sunday, the White House said Colombia had agreed to accept the migrants and Washington would not impose its threatened penalties.
Colombia's government has gotten over its impasse with the government of the United States.
As Colombia backed down, the White House claimed a victory for the Trump administration's uncompromising immigration policies, saying, "Today's events make clear to the world that America is respected again."
Trump can do this in order to pressure Colombia and also as a message to other countries, particularly to Mexico. Because with Mexico, he will impose measures regarding migration, and he's saying, listen, Mexico, because this is what's going on in Colombia.
For now, migrants in Mexico continue to make the journey north. But the clash with Colombia, arguably Washington's closest ally in Latin America, shows how far President Trump is prepared to go to implement his campaign promises and to demonstrate to other countries the price of resisting migrant repatriations. Kate Fisher, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The US and Iran have not exchanged any messages since US President Donald Trump returned to the White House. That's according to Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister, who said that Tehran will act according to the policies implemented by the US. In his first term, Trump pursued a policy of maximum pressure, withdrawing the US from the nuclear deal in return for sanctions relief. The European Union will lift some sanctions against Syria as part of a broader move to bring stability to the war-torn country. The French Foreign Minister says some curbs on the energy, transport and financial sectors will be removed. The latest development follows Syria turning over a new leaf after the abrupt fall of the Assad dynasty. Rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo say they have taken the key city of Goma. The DRC has cut diplomatic ties with Rwanda, accusing it of fueling the rebellion. It follows the deaths of 13 soldiers with the UN peacekeeping forces during clashes with the rebels. And Japan's Osaka has banned public smoking ahead of the World Expo. Violators of the new rule will face a $7 fine. Local regulations already ban smoking while walking in most places in Japan, but lack strict national laws. Around 160 countries and regions are expected to participate in the global event. Now, the CIA has offered a new assessment of the origin of the COVID outbreak, saying the coronavirus is more likely to have leaked from a Chinese lab than to have come from animals. But the intelligence agency cautioned it had low confidence in this determination. Laura Westbrook has more.
The CIA now believes the virus responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic more likely originated from a laboratory and points the finger at China. But the agency's assessment says it's based on low confidence. That means that the intelligence supporting it is deficient, inconclusive, or contradictory. The CIA said it continues to assess that both research-related and natural origin scenarios of the COVID-19 pandemic remain plausible. Now, this new assessment was not based on new intelligence, but a closer look on conditions in high-security labs in Wuhan province, and was reportedly ordered in the last few weeks of the Biden administration. Lawmakers have been putting pressure on America's spy agencies for more information about the origins of the virus, which led to lockdowns, economic upheaval, and millions of deaths. The decision to release a new assessment is one of the first by the new CIA director, John Radcliffe. He was appointed by US President Donald Trump. He has long favored the lab leak theory, claiming COVID most likely came from a leak at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is a 40-minute drive to where the first cluster of infections reportedly emerged. He told Breitbart News he wanted the CIA to abandon its neutral stance on the origins of the virus and get off the sidelines. Beijing, meanwhile, has dismissed the CIA report, saying it has no credibility and it opposes the politicization of the source of the virus. It has also said in a statement for people to respect science and stay away from conspiracy theories. There is no consensus on the cause of the COVID pandemic. Earlier reports on the origins of COVID-19 have split over whether the coronavirus emerged from a Chinese lab, potentially by mistake, or whether it arose naturally. This new assessment is not likely to settle that debate.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you very much. World leaders are gathering in Poland to mark 80 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp. The discovery of a Nazi camp towards the end of World War II remains one of the most powerful symbols of the horrors of the Holocaust. From Berlin, Trent Murray reports.
Remembering one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century.
Ich war sehr, sehr krank.
I was very, very ill. I was unconscious. I was lying on this middle blank bed with the dead or almost dead next to me.
92-year-old Eva Sespezi was just a young girl when Auschwitz-Birkenau was discovered and liberated by Soviet forces 80 years ago today. On the brink of death, she remembers the moment a Russian soldier found her inside the camp.
They thought I was already dead because I was lying with the dead. It became quiet afterwards. There was no one there to give us anything. No food, no drink. I had a high fever. A Russian soldier bent over me and smiled at me, and it was a wonderful feeling. I opened my eyes and felt hope inside me. I felt free. Something happened, a second birth. There was a feeling, a good feeling.
Extermination was the fate of all who were not fit to be active beasts of burden for the Reich.
Eva was one of the fortunate ones to survive the Nazi death camp. Of the more than 6 million Jewish people to be murdered during the Holocaust, 1 million were murdered at Auschwitz-Birkenau alone. When Soviet forces first arrived after the Germans retreated, the raw horror of the Holocaust was made clear for the world to see. Survivors, now frail and in their advanced years, returning to mark 8 decades since that gruesome discovery, alongside world leaders joining to remember what happened here.
Polska.
Poland takes care of those sites in order to protect the memory, in order to keep it alive, so people always remember. And so, through this remembrance, the world never again lets such a dramatic human catastrophe happen, and to be more precise, a catastrophe of humanity.
Here in Berlin, a permanent reminder of the horrors of the Holocaust lies right in the heart of the city at this memorial. For Germans and Europeans more broadly, it's a potent symbol for ensuring that the next generation never forgets the horrors of the past and says never again in the future. And as world leaders arrive at Auschwitz for remembrance ceremonies, survivors like Eva says it's important to remember that such hatred often manifests itself in small ways at the start.
Die Shoah hat nicht mit Auschwitz angefangen.
The Holocaust did not begin with Auschwitz, but with words, silence, and society looking away. And every single person should do something to ensure that something like this never happens again.
A message it's hoped will be carried forward across many cultures and generations. Trent Murray for Al Arabiya News, Berlin.
Returning to our top story now, and thousands of Palestinians are returning to their homes in North Gaza today after Israel opened up the Netzarim corridor. It follows the second weekend of hostage and prisoner exchanges between Israel and Hamas. Palestinians were due to return on Saturday, but experienced a delay over the release of Israeli hostage Arbal Yahoud, who will now be freed on Thursday, with 3 more Israelis expected for release on Saturday. Israel says 8 hostages due to be released in the coming weeks are dead. Let's go live to Leigh Ann now, and that is in the north of Tel Aviv, to speak to Jotam Confino from the Daily Telegraph. Jotam, thank you so much for joining me this evening. 26 hostages were due to be released. That number is now 18. What more do we know about these 8 hostages who are dead?
So it was actually 33 altogether in the first phase, but as you mentioned, we have already seen 7 hostages being released, and we're due to see another 3 on Thursday, and then 3 more on Saturday. But Israel has now been notified by Hamas that 8 of those 33 hostages, they're dead. It's actually something that Israel estimated themselves. Hamas has not identified who they are, so the families don't know if their loved ones are among the dead. And I suspect that this is part of the psychological game that Hamas is playing, because clearly they know who's dead, but they're choosing not to announce the names or reveal the names, because they know that it brings a lot of psychological and emotional pain to the families who are waiting to see if their loved ones are going to come out.
Moving pictures have emerged of thousands of Palestinians returning home to Northern Gaza after months of displacement. But what reality actually awaits them?
Well, they're coming back to rubble. Most of Northern Gaza is affected somehow by the fighting between Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Israel. Many of the houses are completely destroyed. Entire areas are completely in rubble. So many of them will not come back to a home. And that's the question, really. What are they going to do when they come back to Northern Gaza? Because it will take a while before the international organizations can rebuild tents or areas where they can actually shelter until they start rebuilding actual homes. It's a really dire situation for them, obviously, because as you see on those images coming out of Northern Gaza, it was an active war zone for 15 months. It was where some of the heaviest fighting between Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Israel took place.
Israel initially blocked the return of Palestinian civilians to the north of Gaza unless Hamas agreed to release the hostage Abu al-Yahud. Can you tell us what agreement was reached here and how fragile is the ceasefire?
It's incredibly shaky, the ceasefire. We really have to take it day by day. What happened really was that Hamas, according to the ceasefire agreement with Israel, was supposed to release civilian hostages first. They did that on the first day when they released three civilian women. But the week after, they released 4 Israeli soldiers instead of Yehud Arbel, for example, who's a civilian woman. And that caused Israel to say to Hamas, if you're playing games, then we will also have consequences for you. We will not allow the Palestinians to return to Northern Gaza, which is also part of the ceasefire agreement. Eventually, Hamas realized, I think, that having so many Palestinians waiting and sleeping outside, waiting to cross into Northern Gaza was not sustainable. So they eventually agreed to release Yehud Arbel on Thursday, along with 2 other hostages.
Former Israeli Security Minister Ben-Gvir has said we must return to war and destroy, as he criticized Israel for allowing Palestinians to return home. We know he has resigned, but how much sway does he still have? Does his words still carry some sort of authority?
Look, politicians' words always carry some weight, and Ben-Gvir is an increasingly popular figure in Israel. He went from being a complete nobody to actually having a solid voter base now. I don't think that his words will really affect Benjamin Netanyahu, because he knows that his government, for now at least, is stable even without Itamar Ben-Gvir. But of course, you never know with politics in Israel, and therefore I'm sure that he's also listening to him. But Ben-Gvir is currently out of the picture, and he's speaking to his voter base and hoping that they will somehow listen to him.
And Israel and Lebanon have agreed to extend the deadline for Israeli forces to withdraw. What more do we know about this situation?
That's also an incredibly shaky ceasefire, to put it mildly. Both Israel and Hezbollah accuse each other of having violated the ceasefire agreement hundreds of times in the past couple of months. What happened really on Sunday was that, as per the agreement, Israeli soldiers were to completely withdraw from southern Lebanon. But Israel said that the Lebanese army had not done their part according to the ceasefire. They were not in control of the areas in southern Lebanon where Hezbollah was still present. So they said, we need to stay here until we make sure that Hezbollah is not going to be on our borders. And eventually, there was an agreement between Lebanon, the United States, and Israel to basically allow Israel to stay in southern Lebanon until February the 18th. But in the meantime, there were really violent clashes between hundreds of civilians who tried to storm the areas where soldiers are still stationed. They wanted to go back to their homes. Many of them are Hezbollah supporters. And that ended up with Israel shooting at them and killing over 20 people. So that is, of course, another reason to believe that this shaky ceasefire could really escalate any moment.
Jotam Confino, correspondent at the Daily Telegraph, thank you very much for your insights. Now, Chinese artificial intelligence startup DeepSeek could shape the core of Silicon Valley and threaten America's dominance over AI technology. Earlier today, global stocks in major players like Nvidia fell 10%, with some experts predicting as much as $1 trillion drop. We can now chat to Neil Shah, who is the Vice President of Research at Counterpoint Research. Neil, thank you so much for joining me. First of all, explain what DeepSeek is and why it's been seen as such a rival to long-established AI technologies in the US.
Yeah, thanks for having me. DeepSeek is basically spun off of a hedge fund who was using it for building a trading platform, AI-driven trading platform. But it's spin off, and this was a side project where they built this LLM or large language model, AI model, to run as a chatbot. And they started training that model similar to how Meta, OpenAI trained their model. But at the same time, they use a very different technique because they did not have access to the vast resources what Meta or OpenAI has in terms of the NVIDIA GPU. So they became more creative and started a technique, learned a technique of fine-tuning the model based on more regenerative feedback rather than just a supervised training. So they found a sweet spot where they could do the training more efficiently than the bigger rivals in US. And that is where they have built this model, which is very performing really well. And it has been built very efficiently with minimum infrastructure. So that has caused a lot of panic among Western players where China, which has been stifled to get latest and greatest semiconductors to train the AI models efficiently, they could not. But now DeepSeek comes up with a novel model, with a novel technique, which is more effective and efficient and is challenging in the big players in terms of performance. So all the trillions of dollars of investments which we are seeing or which would happen in the next few years, so there's a big question mark on that.
So DeepSeek's emergence really comes as the US is restricting the sale of the advanced chip technology that powers AI to China. Have the Western markets been caught out here? Have they been sort of blindsided by DeepSeek?
Sort of yes and no, and maybe I think DeepSeek might have got lucky with its technique because the technique which it has approached might not work because it is more novel and never tried before in a way where they have tried it. So I would say they got lucky, but their methodology did wonders for them, and they have reached a performance level at a very lower cost and a lower infrastructure resources. And that is where everyone is shocked how it could have done this. And that is where everyone is back to drawing board. How can we become more efficient without spending so much dollars in infrastructure?
Yes, indeed. President Trump has announced plans to invest heavily in AI technology. But is it too late if China has basically beaten them to it and, as you say, created a cheaper version?
I don't think so at this point because obviously this is a great start, but at the same time, you have a good model which is trained at a lower cost, but then comes the scalability part. How can you scale this model to millions of developers, millions of enterprises which will use this as a base model, and you have to keep it updating, right? And you need to have, if you have this ChatGPT type chatbot and the app which actually DeepSeek has launched, it is #1 on the app stores, but it has stopped working for most of them because it does not have the scale or the GPU prowess to keep it going, right? So the capex might be lower, but the operating expenditure is way high, and it requires a bigger infrastructure. And this is where the US is very much well positioned because they have access to the latest and greatest silicon, semiconductors, and the infrastructure to keep it going at scale, right?
Neil Shah, Vice President of Research and co-founder at Centerpoint Research. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Staying with business news, the UK's largest luxury car maker, Jaguar Land Rover, says it's investing $81 million to expand its bespoke paint services. The plan includes opening new facilities in the UK and Slovakia. The firm, which is owned by India's Tata Group, says it expects to more than double its bespoke paint operation due to growing demand from wealthy customers. Now, nearly 19 million Americans are expected to go on cruise vacations this year. However, travel group AAA says passenger growth is likely to cool off in 2025 following a post-pandemic boom. Let's go to sports now. Barcelona has ended their 4-match winless streak in La Liga with a 7-1 victory over Valencia. Fermin Lopez scored an impressive double and added 2 assists. Barcelona sits third in the standing with 42 points, 3 behind second-place Atletico Madrid and 7 from the leaders Real Madrid. And Postecoglou says he doesn't know if he will avoid the sack after Tottenham hit a new low with a 2-1 defeat against struggling Leicester City. Tottenham has lost 6 of their last 7 Premier League matches to increase the pressure on the under-fire manager. Tottenham now sit in 15th place, just 8 points above the relegation zone. US President Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke on the phone over the weekend as they promised to meet soon. The two leaders discussed a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza, vowing to work together for security in the Middle East. The economy was also on the agenda as the two countries talked about promoting a fair bilateral economic relationship. We can now cross over live to London to speak to our correspondent, Olly Barratt. Olly, good evening to you. Can you give us some more details on what was discussed in this phone call? The weekend newspapers seem to suggest there would be difficulties ahead. So what are the main sticking points here?
Well, there are certainly potential difficulties in the US-UK relationship at the moment, but the call, we are told, was warm. That's how Downing Street described it today, and constructive as well. We got brief readouts from both sides, making it clear that they did speak about the economy. The Prime Minister apparently told President Trump about the ways in which he's cutting regulation in the UK economy to make it an attractive place to invest. They talked about the Middle East and the Gaza ceasefire there. There were a number of other issues too, but given that we're told that the call was 45 minutes long, there are quite a few topics that we're told by government sources weren't actually discussed. The government here in London today telling us that Ukraine was not on the agenda. The appointment of the incoming UK ambassador to the US, Lord Mandelson, that wasn't discussed, we were told. Downing Street today also telling us that the issues of Greenland and the US desire to have control of it wasn't discussed, and neither was discussed the Chagos Islands deal that the UK has recently agreed with Mauritius, but that some in America have some concerns about. So in some ways, it was as interesting what they didn't discuss as what they did discuss, and what we're told, as I say, was a warm 45-minute phone conversation.
Yes, indeed, Olly. But when can we expect these two leaders to meet in person? We know Donald Trump met Theresa May when he became president the first time round.
We're told that they will meet soon, but we don't have a timeline on that. Downing Street here in London today not wanting to give us a sense of exactly when it might happen. We also don't know whether it might be Keir Starmer going to Washington or President Trump coming to the UK. And we also don't know whether, if President Trump does come to the UK, it might be in the form of a state visit. That hasn't been confirmed yet either. Some speculation that perhaps Keir Starmer could be in Washington within days from now. But as I say, Downing Street at the moment and the White House not wanting to put a timeline on exactly what soon actually means.
Trump and Starmer have met before. However, they haven't actually seen each other since Trump's friend, Elon Musk, made some critical comments surrounding the UK grooming gangs. We know the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, previously called Trump a tyrant. Have either of these things affected the so-called special relationship between the US and the UK, Olly?
Well, there have absolutely been concerns here in London that perhaps the special relationship might be affected by some of those comments from Elon Musk and perhaps his influence over Donald Trump, because he has been very critical of Keir Starmer and the UK government. But it appears that the special relationship, for now at least, is holding up pretty well. And Donald Trump, before the telephone call with Keir Starmer, actually made some very complimentary comments about Keir Starmer, insisting that he thinks he's been doing a very good job, even though they have philosophical differences, as he put it. And as I say, Downing Street insisting this was a very warm call and that the two leaders have agreed to try and work together to make sure that the US-UK relationship can flourish. That's not to say that the anxiety here in London about the potential for difficulties in this relationship at some point in the future has entirely gone away.
Olly Barratt in London, thank you so much for joining me. A reminder of our top story. Thousands of Palestinians return home to Gaza after 15 months of war. Chinese AI startup DeepSeek threatens to topple America's dominance in the world of tech. Deportation in exchange for hefty tariffs. Colombia accepts repatriated citizens to escape President Trump's 25% tax on goods. And 80 years since Auschwitz, world leaders and survivors mark the liberation of the Nazi death camp. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you for joining us. Coming up next, a special interview with Professor Manolis Kellis, Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Computer Science at MIT. And don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining us.